starting with the sports media of your old life, it strikes me that the world of sports media has changed in many ways that center around your old job. In other words, when you started out in the business, you were filing stories more traditionally, and then social media took over. And no one kind of encapsulates that change, I think, more than you, where very much you kind of became famous for breaking news over social media platforms. And I think your salary skyrocketed because of the amount of followers that you accumulated, but also I would think that the job fundamentally changed into an endless grind. And I'm curious if that shift, in essence, perhaps pushed you out of sports journalism before it may have if social media never existed.
Yeah, I think it became a thing where people focused on the social media part of it, but the job was still much larger than social media. At ESPN, news might appear on Twitter, but you've also filed it. It's appearing on the ESPN alerts at that time. You're writing stories that bring more depth to it. But I think sometimes the focus was on social media. There was a younger audience that lived on Twitter and then Instagram. And so while I think some people thought that was an overwhelming majority of my job, it really wasn't. It was one step as part of kind of a bigger process when you would break news. And for me, for the end of my career, I just felt I had done everything that I wanted to do in that industry. I never imagined doing anything else but I wanted to be a sports writer. I went to St. Bonaventure. I just thought I would work in newspapers, and those were my idols, were newspaper columnists. And I wanted to be a big city columnist. And then, eventually the profession became more online, more digital, and I went to Yahoo and obviously to ESPN after that. I think for me, you're right. It compensated you well. My lifestyle with my family never really changed through that. I never planned to do that forever. And as much as I did leave ESPN, I found myself pulled to something else. That was to go back to my alma mater, to St. Bonaventure, and help them, through this really complicated time of the transfer portal, of NIL, and to help them team build.
Part of your sort of later career revolved around this perceived rivalry steeped in Hollywood ties with Shams Charania, that a person that you handpicked and then became sort of a rivalry to break scoops with online. And all of these younger social media people would post these images of you with, the wrestlers and you beating up Shams, or, Shams first, or however it may be. And then, of course, Shams took over at ESPN. And I'm curious if that perceived rivalry invigorated you or annoyed you.
I would say neither. I was always focused on the job I had. When you start getting distracted by those things, I had a process that I used to do my job. It certainly was all encompassing. What was created was this 24/7 news cycle. And so to me, I always felt there were two things you could really focus on. You better not have a third thing, and that was this job and your family. And if you were caught up in a third thing in any way, I don't think you were going to be as good as you needed to be in your job and in your family life. And so while I understand, social media can create the illusions of a lot of stuff, for me, it was always really just, and there were a lot of competitors in the arena. I mean, there were so many people who are so good that I came up in the business with, who came along. It's an intensely competitive business. And that's the one thing I've loved about what I'm doing now is obviously college basketball is really competitive. And so that competitiveness that I've always had, I think that allowed me to do well, I hope translates to what I'm doing now.
When you saw that Shams tweet about the Luka AD trade, did a piece of you say, "Oh, I wish that was me. I wish I was still doing this"?
I didn't see the tweet. My focus is on college basketball, was on recruiting. I broke a lot of stories. I had been in the middle of a lot of stuff through the years. I knew there would be more trades and more signings after I left. That's not what drove me. I wanted to follow what my passion was and where I wanted to be. And I've not looked back I look back very fondly at the time I had at ESPN and Yahoo and newspapers prior to that. But I made a decision that I was ready to move on from it. There hasn't been one moment since I left ESPN in September where I thought I wanted to be doing anything but what I'm doing now at St. Bonaventure.
So compare and contrast. Walk me through what your day, you wake up, what your day was like when you were in the thick of the ESPN job versus, and this can be our segue to your current life, what your life is like today.
Well, the things that are common are, I'm talking to NBA teams, I'm talking to agents, I'm talking to folks internationally in basketball and obviously domestically. The conversations are different. I'm talking about players and recruiting, and then every day there's two things I do: recruiting and then fundraising for NIL, and that takes a lot of different shapes. And so, the agents who I knew for a very long time, we'd be talking about stories and deals that might be happening. Now we're talking about potential players for St. Bonaventure. And so I'm still calling on a lot of folks. I can talk to NBA teams, especially internationally, about what they have in their scouting reports and their systems on particular players. I can get a lot of intel about players, about what their scouts in different parts of the world think about a player on the court to know what I need to know off the court. And so, again, still talking to a lot of the same folks, but it's a different conversation now.
Has the relationship changed, though? Because I would imagine if you go from pressing someone for information that is unreported toward what you're talking about them now, I could see perhaps a relationship evolving through the course of those different discussions.
I guess it is different. A lot of these relationships I had for a very long time. And so in the previous job, and is very similar to this and that, I used to always say, breaking news is a 365-day a year job, and it's a 365-day a year conversation. You're not just calling people when you need stories. You might have 50, 60 conversations with somebody before you ever call them when there's news. It's exactly the same now. You don't just call people when you want a player for them. You call people when they don't have any players and talk to them about, what's going on in their world. And for me too, I'm always trying to learn. I have such a learning curve in this with player evaluation and working with our coaching staff about the right kind of players for us. And so I like asking, NBA teams about their relationships internally in their organizations and how those work and how they learned to partner with their coaching staff. And same when I talk to coaches about how they work with their front office. So for me, this was a year of a lot of learning and then kind of retracing my steps in those relationships to go back and, and really, continue to try to learn because, again, I'm new to this and I came into it understanding, I've got a lot of work to do, to be able to be up to speed.
Well, I'm going to learn something here because your job as general manager of St. Bonaventure, when I think of general manager from a professional standpoint, that's the guy that is selecting the players that then the coach utilizes. I'm assuming it's not quite the same in college basketball, right? So you're not actually handpicking all of the players and making the decisions, this player, this player, this player.
No, it's a cooperative effort. And our head coach, Mark Schmidt, and our coaching staff, they're going to make the ultimate decision on who's on our roster. What I'm trying to do is bring them two things. Bring them a lot of options, players that we can get involved with. Hey, watch film on these 3 or 4 guys. Do you like any of these guys? We've got good intel. I think this guy might fit. And they might say, yeah, we really like these 3. This 4th may not fit. Let's recruit these 3. But then also financially, it's got to fit essentially into a salary cap. And then, our head coach is going to lean on me. Can we afford it? We have to build out a roster. So you may love a player, but that may, paying what it might cost to bring in that player might impact your ability to do some other things on the roster. And so you're making a lot of decisions built around a payroll, and it's very much of a professional model now. College basketball, college football has been professionalized. And so, I have a salary cap that I'm trying to work through.
What is that salary cap?
That's something that we keep private at St. Bonaventure.
Will that change with the coming House settlement, assuming that goes through?
We have to always be raising more money, and we certainly know in our league, in the Atlantic 10, the disparity between what we can pay and what some others can pay is significant. We've got to be able to continue to close that gap. What we have to be is efficient, and we have to be the resources we do have. I would say this. We've got to be able to get high major players for mid-major money in the Atlantic 10. You need high major players to win in our league. I feel like we've got several of them in this recruiting class, but it is a constant challenge for schools. St. Bonaventure is unique. There's not another school quite like us in the country. There are other schools with 1,900 students, but they're not playing in the Atlantic 10. They're not playing against VCU and Dayton and St. Louis. A league that in any given year is usually ranked probably 7th or 8th in the country. There's other schools playing with other smaller schools and leagues. And so we've always had to punch up. And now with NIL and the portal, I think the challenges are even greater for us. But what I have found, there's tremendous opportunity for us. I think with the coach we have that people want to send their players to play to and the relationships that I have, we've had access to great players this year. We've got to continue to be able to raise the money to be able to recruit them and then hopefully retain them.
Is part of your job in recruitment to try to guess which players will not take advantage of the transfer portal and use St. Bonaventure as sort of a feeder system to a larger school?
We have to understand the landscape that for us, we may be the trampoline to a larger school. And, our best player this year who came in and was an all-league player went to Kansas for exponentially more NIL, and we understood it. And so we hope that helps us recruit the next player. But you're right, like finding players who you really believe that our institution resonates with. I spend a lot of time thinking about what a Bonaventure guy is, and families and players who value that environment that's, again, a smaller school that's played in a big-time conference, not a lot of distractions around us in upstate New York. And then it's on us to give them a great experience, hopefully to win, and make them want to stay another year. Listen, there was a time where you looked at your group, you're building 4-year teams. I would argue right now you're trying to build a 2-year team at any given point. Yeah. And so it's absolutely changed, but you're right. We've spent a lot of time this year in Canada. Canada is going to be really important for us. We have a great tradition of players from there. We're close to the border. There's some fewer schools up there recruiting, but lots of talent. And then Europe. And so you've got to go to places where you feel like, the crowd is a little thinned out in recruiting.
It sounds like Moneyball, sort of, what you're doing.
I think every day about that scene with Brad Pitt in the movie, who's playing Billy Beane, where he says to his scouts, if we try to play like the Yankees in here, they're going to beat us out there. And we have to do it. We have competed at the top of our league in the Atlantic 10. We've been to multiple NCAA tournaments. But we're going to do it not necessarily trying to go head-to-head financially with those guys. We've got to find players in other parts, in other realms that allow us to get value on every deal we do and allow for the great coaching staff we have to develop players, which we've got an outstanding tradition of doing.
You mentioned how the landscape has changed from trying to build a 4-year program to a 2-year program. Is that good for college basketball?
I do think it's probably really good for high major college basketball. You saw an NCAA tournament this year with the number 1 seeds going through. I think in the past you would see the mid-majors who pulled upsets, who made runs. You'd see an older mid-major team that had been together for years, maybe playing a team of one-and-done high majors who, while those guys have better professional futures, they're 18, they're younger.
That was always how I looked for upsets. I would just
Yeah.
look, what of the mid-majors had 5 seniors or 4 seniors? I'll pick that team.
And that's harder to keep. So now that group is harder to keep together. And that group then, can go to a high major, any one of those individuals. And so that continuity is not there at the mid-major level. There's still teams at our level who are, who are going to be highly competitive. But I do think it's an advantage for the high majors because the money discrepancy is so dramatic from the very top to where we are. But there's a pathway for us to do it at St. Bonaventure. And so you're working on what your pathway is. And this year we've got a recruiting class of players. I think the best junior college player in the country, Joe Grahovic, picked St. Bonaventure from California.
He's an amazing story. That guy,
He's an amazing story.
Yeah.
He'll be
homeless, right? Was he homeless?
He lived for about 2 months in his truck. I mean, 1 year ago this time, he was playing at 24/7 Fitness, goes to Fullerton College under Coach Perry Webster, becomes, again, I thought the best junior college player in the country, and we're bringing him to St. Bonaventure. A point guard, Ilya Ermakov from Moscow, Russia, a shooting guard from Achille Linati from Milan, Italy, and then, players all in between that. So, you're bringing in a group from all over the world, and you've got to be able to recruit the globe right now.
I get March Madness is not the be-all and end-all of college basketball, and that it's bigger than that. But I wrote about this, that the point you made, though, of like, if you're eliminating or making it far less likely that a mid-major can compete with one of the high majors, doesn't that take away the magic a little bit of what this great event has been?
It does take away the magic, and I think what you're seeing right now is the Power Four conferences are really dictating the rules, the landscape. You're seeing with this house settlement, it's the Power Four leagues deciding the rules and how this is going to go, and all of that, literally all of it, is to benefit them. And so I tell our folks all the time, don't wait around for legislation that's going to come out to make it easier for us at St. Bonaventure or St. Joe's in Philly in our league or other comparable schools to ours. We've got to understand who we are, what our pathway is to building teams, because no one's coming to rescue us. And even scheduling those high majors is really hard. Even we'll go to your place and play you, that's not easy. They would rather play teams from the far low end that they don't think can beat them in their building. So it's a challenge, but at the same time, I'm at St. Bonaventure because I believe we can do this. We can continue to do this. And having been in the job now 8, 9, 10 months, I'm more convinced than ever that there's a pathway for us, but you have to look at this whole structure differently.
A pathway to what, though? Like, what's the realistic goal? Is it to win the A10?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I still think we can we've won 2 regular season, 2 postseason Atlantic 10 titles with Mark Schmidt as our coach. You're seeing fewer at-large bids in mid-major leagues. And these super conferences are gobbling up many more of the bids. And so in a lot of cases, even at 26, 27 wins in a league like the Atlantic 10, there's not it's not a given you'll get an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament. Winning your league in March. And so we put a great premium on a team that we think can make that run in a March weekend at the Atlantic 10 tournament. But there's no doubt in my mind that St. Bonaventure can still compete because we have a great coach. We have an institution where people really care about our program. And again, it's finding guys who fit your environment. And St. Bonaventure in a remote location is not for everybody. But I always think about, we're not trying to put a football roster together. I don't need 30 guys in a recruiting class. We need 5, 6, 7 guys who buy into our environment and our culture. And I think we found them this year, and I think we can continue to find them. But, we all have to be open-minded to the fact that the landscape is so different. And in a lot of ways, this has become a professionalized model of basketball.
You're also on the Players Health NIL Advisory Committee. What is that exactly, and why did you accept that?
Players Health gives us a chance to compete, certainly financially when we're putting our roster together and maximize our money. 2 things. They allow us to insure our contracts of players, and so that if a player gets injured, that we can get financial relief on that player's money.
So this is sort of like an insurance organization?
It's an insurance, and it's exactly, it's insurance. And, you think if you're an NBA team, you have these tremendous investments in players. Those contracts are insured if players get injured. We have to be able to do the same. So donors get a peace of mind that if I've given money to help, a particular player or help a roster, it doesn't just go down the drain because that player may get injured. We get relief on that for a premium. And then being able to put bonuses in contracts, incentives, you're able to incentivize, team success, NCAA tournament, all conference, different things that we can put into individual awards in the postseason, all conference or defensive player of the year. And so we may not be able to guarantee as much money as a higher profile school with more resources, but we can put bonuses in those deals where if they reach both team goals or individual goals, now that deal comes closer to somebody we're competing with. And I know that I know there were several instances this year with having those bonuses beyond the guaranteed money in a deal allowed us to get a player we probably wouldn't have otherwise gotten. So players' health just allows us to be really creative in our team building and in retention, and then also protecting us against injury. I'm not sure how we'd be able to do our job at St. Bonaventure without the help players' health gives us, to manage our roster.
There are a couple NBA questions. Do you feel the NBA has a regular season gameplay problem where the season is too long, the regular season games are too meaningless, and fans are starting to potentially tune out? I think we saw the ratings, they were kind of the same, slightly up maybe this year. They're going to have new media partners next year, though. And is that a risk that without tweaks to the game, fans may start to tune out a little bit?
Well, I think there's a combination of, the regular season probably is too long, but there's no way to shorten it without taking less money. And these deals have been negotiated. The CBA has been negotiated. I think it'll stay at 82 games. I think what has helped is, the league, moving away from the load management where people didn't know night from night, if I bought a ticket, am I going to see a star play? If I tune into the game, it's 7:30 on ESPN. Is Luka or LeBron or LeBron's not a good example because he always plays. But others who are they going to be in the lineup? And so I think the league did a pretty good job of addressing that, putting games played on postseason awards, and then teams especially with nationally televised games had to account for that with their star players. I think this is a league certainly, and you've seen it. This has been a tremendous playoffs. A lot of tight games, a lot of game sevens.
The parity has really come through this particular.
You're seeing it, and this is what the NBA wanted when they put in this salary cap, that the big market teams could no longer hoard, with owners who could just spend into the luxury tax without really any financial impact to them. It allowed them to load up on more star players. Now you're seeing the star players be spread around the league in smaller markets. And that's what the NBA wanted. That's certainly what the smaller market teams wanted. And I do think that's going to be, for this league, an Indiana and a Minnesota being in a conference final. Obviously, New York, Leon Rose has done a tremendous job of building out that roster and giving them a level of success they haven't had since Patrick Ewing was there.
The irony is not lost on me that what you just described is exactly the opposite of what we just described with college basketball, right? Where all of the talent is going to the big schools. In the NBA, it is an example of a system that Adam Silver has been able to model there of trying to figure out how do we spread out the talent
and the difference is you have 30 owners in the NBA who understand the difference between Steve Ballmer, if let's say he's the richest owner, and whoever number 30 is. That gap is still far smaller than Kentucky and maybe St. Bonaventure, right? And so those teams still have much more in common with each other. They need all of them to be thriving for the league to work. You have sort of in college basketball and college football, certainly, and football drives so much of it, 4 super conferences that probably don't think they need quote unquote smaller market leagues or programs, and so the disparity and without really a true salary cap, it's just going to look a lot different in college than the NFL or the NBA, where even the difference between 1 and 30 isn't as dramatic as the difference in here between the top 25 teams and then maybe the bottom 150.
Last question. Do you find yourself more relaxed doing this job than the job of having to break news at all times every day?
It's a different kind of pressure, a different investment. The difference with this one, for the most part, if I'm at dinner with my wife or with my family or with somebody, I can turn my phone over.
Yeah.
I can turn the ringer off. There's almost no call that I can't deal with 2 hours from now.
Yeah. How many times in your life had you had to interrupt an event because your phone was going off?
Yeah, that was a regular occurrence.
Yeah.
And so that part of it for me is I've really enjoyed. But, certainly I'm competitive and I want to do well. We want to do well at St. Bonaventure. And so I don't feel like I'm working less hard or putting in less hours, but I would say it's been more gratifying to be a part of what I'm doing now. And, all the things that I hoped it would be when I made the decision to leave and retire from ESPN, retire from media. I'm feeling those, I'm feeling that now in this new role.
And you really don't miss the Woj bombs, the energy shots of a, no.
I get it now of like where I feel my gratification now is, seeing one of our players do well. We just had our senior Noel Brown, who just graduated on Sunday with an MBA and has been through a really difficult road with his family and losing his mom last year, and seeing him on graduation day, like that to me is much more fulfilling than any of that other stuff was. I'm proud of the career I had. It was all I ever imagined doing as a young person. But this for me right now at this stage of my life is something that I'm loving this challenge, and it's been really gratifying.
You may even get me up to a St. Bonaventure basketball game.
We'd love to have you up, Alex.
Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.